put your name in the door prize bag, and you want to be in that bag, raise your hand, and Dorothy will come. This is Dorothy, not the other. And if you raise your hand, and she'll bring you a piece of paper to sign up in your bag. Thank you. Okay, so, yes.
What's the door prize?
I'm not going to tell you. It's a surprise. Yeah, it's a surprise. So, you'll love it. Are you hopeful?
I am.
Okay. So, Gratiot Lake Conservancy, how many, I think most of you are familiar with the Conservancy. Some of you, this might be the first meeting you've come to. Can you raise your hand if this is the first time you've been here? Great, some newbies. So welcome. And the Conservancy, as it says, is most of the land that we are stewards of is in the vicinity of Gratiot Lake, and that's our name. So the first thing I want to say is, as we all know, it's been a tumultuous and rather time of a lot of change in the last couple of years. And the Conservancy, individuals have had that in their own lives, and the Conservancy and other nonprofits have had the same thing. Some of you know that I tried to retire about, what is it now? About 4 years ago. And I thought I had been successful, but here I am again. So I am actually not only the president of Gratiot Lake Conservancy, but I am right now the acting program director. And we're still searching for a person again. So it is what it is. Another big change in the last couple of years is there are many of our members, such dear members have passed away. I see some faces in this audience of relatives of those people. Steve Albee was one, and Virginia Jamison. There's Dante Iacoboni and Frank Carlton and Janice Anderson. And I'm sure there are more, and I wrote down a few of them from the last 12 months. But it's been kind of stunning how many people have passed and just have disruption in life. So that's kind of a sad way to start, but I felt I wanted to honor those people. Some of the members that have passed away were actually life members of the Conservancy. Some have been members since the very start of the Conservancy, which was about 22 years ago. So anyway, that's history. And we move on, and we honor the past as we do that. Hopefully this will work. So this is a picture Jim just took. That's Jim back there. He's trying to video this. Good luck, Jim. So there are some note cards on the back table. While I'm thinking of it, to remind you that if you're interested in buying an individual note card, that's fine. They're on a discounted rate at $3. And if you are wanting to donate $100 or more tonight, you can have 5 of them as a premium, as a gift from Jim and I. So it's a time of transformation. This little ebony damselfly, ebony, it's a beautiful name. Can't remember it, it's ebony something or another. They like the streaming system. I've seen these in the Little Gratiot River where it exits Gratiot Lake. And dragonflies and damselflies are symbols of transformation, and that's where we're all in that period now of transformation. So I'd like to say that the position for the Conservancy is up for grabs right now, so to speak. We do have some people that have applied again, and it would be wonderful to fill the whole position. This is the job description for the whole 9 yards. It's tough because it's a part-time position, and a lot of younger people are looking for full-time, understandably. In the short term, we might be hiring just an office manager, and that would be fine too. So if you know someone, or you are someone who might be interested in applying, please let me know. Okay, we moved to one newsletter a year that's mailed to most members, and it used to be two. We're doing a brief thing about programming in the spring, so that's another change. One thing that hasn't changed is the land conservation piece of what the Conservancy does. And this is a picture of the Beach Road, Noblet Lane, as it goes toward the Noblet Field Station, and looking out towards the lake. And right in front here is tall meadow rue, which is a beautiful native plant, a native perennial that grows along that road. It's a nice walk if you can get over there. If you have a four-wheel drive vehicle or a boat, it's a nice walk to go just on that beach road and then to the from there. The Conservancy continues to gain more land. In 2019, this piece of land, kind of in this section, was added. It's sort of in the northeast corner of the lake, and it added almost 200 acres to the acreage already owned by Gratiot Lake Conservancy. So right now, the Conservancy owns about 700 acres, a little over that, on the shores of Gratiot Lake. The Noblet Field Station is right about where that green dot is. And most of the homes on the lake are on this side. So it's it's a pretty wonderful opportunity to be able to conserve that land, and it also preserves the lake quality, the ecosystem that's in the water. The only downside of the Conservancy land is it's a little hard to get to. Some of you have been there. It's a dirt road, and it's about a 7-mile drive around from the more paved side of the lake. Or you can take a boat from the public access and zip right over there if you're lucky enough to have a boat. So that works pretty well too. The other piece of land that the Conservancy is responsible for is Bomber Farm, which is up here. That's upland, and it's about 466 acres. So the land goes on, no matter what the transformation of the organization. And we have a good stewardship of that land. There's another shot. This is drone footage that was taken by Lou Lizadro. And it's looking, those of you familiar with the lake, it's looking from east to the west. And this is the sandy beach. And here's the Conservancy land, the Conservancy Field Station is somewhere in here. I'm really bad at maps. There are people here in this room that are much better at maps than I am. And it's kind of a different view of the lake that you don't often see, unless you're a bird. So this is, the other thing that Gratiot Lake Conservancy does is it owns easement on land. Many of you are familiar with Keweenaw Land Trust. They own easement on quite a few properties. Gratiot Lake Conservancy owns the easement on the Little Gratiot River Wilderness, which the land itself is actually owned by the Lutho Wilderness Foundation, and it's stewarded by Keweenaw Community Forest Company, which also manages the Conservancy land that Gratiot Lake Conservancy actually owns. So what does it mean to hold an easement on that? That means that we hold the rights, the Conservancy holds the rights to development, which means that it can't be developed. It's conserved in perpetuity as a wilderness for the wildlife and the natural resources that are there. This land is managed differently in that there aren't any trails. It's really not, I mean, you can drive through there on the logging road and you can see some of it, but it's not really easily accessible by the public. It's really more for the wildlife, and it's kind of a reservoir for wildlife to flourish And so this red line shows you the extent of the acreage of that wilderness area. It's quite large, and was funded by the Lutho family. The blue, just to give you an idea of how much conservation land there is to the south of Gratiot Lake, is the Beta Green Preserve. So this blue line is outlining all of that land. I think it's pretty up to date, and it includes Deer Lake, which many of you are probably familiar with. I was familiar with as a good spot to take blueberries. Oops, now you know my spot for blueberries. And so that gives you some perspective on conservation. That's just kind of in to the south of Gratiot Lake. So some of you know that with COVID, the Conservancy has moved to programs that have been virtual. And Gina Marie Jarvie, who was the most recent program director, and she was great, but having a second child intervened in her plan to be the program director of the Conservancy. She just was, managing the farm was too much. One of the things that we have inherited from her year with the Conservancy is the book club. So we have a virtual book club. Anyone can join it. It's focused on natural history, environment, nature stuff, and we try to make it fairly relevant to the region we're in as much as possible. So some of the books we've discussed have been classics like Sand County Almanac, which many of you probably read years and years. I read it decades and decades ago, but it's still relevant. And some of the books were newer, like this one by Suzanne Simard, Finding the Mother Tree, about the communication of trees with each other underground. An amazing memoir, that one. And the last one we discussed was kind of controversial. Barry Lopez's classic Of Wolves and Men, which is about as much about people as it is about wolves. So that book club is going on. If you're interested, email me and I'll put you on the list to get a special invitation. It's usually 4 times a year we've been doing it. The other virtual programming has been workshops, I guess you'd call them webinars, about research that's taken place around the Gratiot Lake area. And you may recognize the young man, whoops, didn't mean to do that, right here. All right, who's going to win the prize and point to him? All right, so that's Daniel McPherson, Lazadra McPherson, and he is also a board member of Gratiot Lake Conservancy. So Daniel is also a geologist, and he has mapped, been instrumental in the remapping of the Keweenaw Fault. And so his program was just about that, and about how the fault drops right down to Gratiot Lake. That was pretty cool to find that out. You want to talk to him more about it, I'm sure he'll talk your ear off. So that was one of the programs. We also had one on dendrochronology, which is the tree rings. That was Zachary Merrill that did that program. And John Younger, who is the researcher who studies small mammal populations on Conservancy land, did a program about his work and populations of little mammals, like think rodents, between Conservancy, which is inland, and Rabbit Island, which is an island in Lake Superior. So all interesting programs. Gina Marie did one on native plants. It was a virtual program last summer. And just this winter, we had a really interesting program on, it was the wildlife camera slides, images that were taken by the animals themselves on Gratiot Lake land. So Keweenaw Community Forest Company and Gina Nicholas and Mark Salo worked on getting those cameras installed in various wetland sites on Gratiot Lake Conservancy land. And here's a listing of some of the animals that they could figure out with the help of John Younger, who is the mammal specialist, and Jared Wolf at Michigan Tech, who is also very knowledgeable on animal identifications. So not a whole lot of surprises, but some pretty cool pictures. So there were 100 slides that were talked about during the virtual program. And so here's a wolf at Gratiot Lake in winter. These are all winter slides that I put on here. Here's those turkeys. They're everywhere. They look pretty good, don't they? Yeah. Thanksgiving, maybe?
Delicious.
And there's an eagle at the outlet, the Little Gratiot River, going for something. So just so you know, if you do walk over at Conservancy land, someone's watching you. Because most of the cameras aren't right on, they're not really on trails, but you just watch what you do. No. Just kidding. So these programs are, most of them are available either through the Conservancy website, or I can send you a link, because they were all recorded on Zoom. So if you missed them, it's not too late. So the other thing that's happening on Conservancy land is research, which I already alluded to. John Younger has small mammal population research, and he also has taught workshops for students from Governor State University. That's where he teaches. That's where he's a professor. So this is, in 2019, he had an aquatic ecology class that stayed at Noble Field Station, and he's going to be doing it again in about a week and a half. So those students will be there for 3 days. They'll get a real camping experience, a little bit step up from tent camping, but not much, and get a chance to see the aquatic ecology of Gratiot Lake, the outlet, Lake Superior. They'll be going to various wetlands as a comparison. No, this is not one of the researchers, but this is to remind me of what I'm going to tell you next. So Jared Wolf, who is at Michigan Tech, is leading a team that is going to be doing sampling of various animals for zoonotic disease. So this is something the CDC has grants out for, and evidently Tech has received money. They have a lab there that can do genetic analysis of samples. And so they're looking for diseases that can be problems with animals, or that animals may be reservoir of the disease that could be transmitted to people. So you could probably think of a few. Yeah. So the animals that they're doing live trapping and release. So they're not killing any like small mammals or birds. They will be doing mist netting of birds for a few days, and they'll be doing live trapping, sort of like what John Younger does, on a small section of Conservancy land to take blood and probably on the little chipmunks or whatever, they take a tiny snippet of tissue on their ear. And they'll analyze that at the lab to see what these little critters might be carrying. Jared Wolf said, you might not like what you hear, but you know, the fact is that probably a lot of animals do carry something. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transmit to us, but they can understand more about the prevalence of it and, you know, differences in different areas. So that research will be happening soon. They did a little bit. And the other thing is they're looking for ticks and mosquitoes. Do you think they'll have any trouble finding mosquitoes? And I don't think that's trap and release. I wasn't too concerned about the welfare of them, I'm sorry. Okay. I have to hurry up. What time is it? So I have 5 minutes. All right, I'm going to make this really quick. All right, this is a picture of some of the stewardship of the land. So we collaborate with KISMA. We're partnered with Keweenaw Invasive Species Management Area. These folks were in on the Beaver Dam flooding on Conservancy land lopping off the heads of invasive European thistle. And it's a daunting task. Dorothy Asher over there helped me to also, at the time they were working in the wetlands, we worked along the road. Thank you, Dorothy. It's always nice to have some volunteers. This is last year at the public access to Gratiot Lake. Kisma was there giving out information on invasive aquatic species, and also there was a boat wash, so people could learn how to clean their boats before they transmit stuff between lakes. Dorothy Jamison in the back there has been helped out a lot with this stewardship program. This is the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. Dorothy does the Suchi disc into the water to see the transparency of the water several times. Well, how many times? Usually around
Once a week?
Once a week, all summer.
For, June, July, August?
Yeah, and it's a comparative year to year. It's really, we haven't seen a huge change in the years that this has taken place. Another former Gratiot Lake resident who passed away this year was Ed Kading. And he was the one who was the first volunteer who worked on this program, doing it every week during the summer. It's a big commitment. Jim and I go out and we take phosphorus samples once a year, and that too hasn't fluctuated too much. It changes a little bit year to year. Ignore this slide because this has been canceled, this program. They're going to try to reschedule it. It's a workshop they were going to do, the Keweenaw Invasive Species Management Area. This shows what Jim and I find when we do sampling for invasive species at the lake. So every year we do a transect, a line that we're throwing a rake down with a rope attached to it. The rake rakes up plant material that's in the water there, and then we put it in a pan. I look at it. I'm looking for certain invasive plants that might be there, and if there's nothing untoward, the stuff goes back in. We report whether or not we found anything. So far, it's all good, and so it's part of the monitoring of the lake. All right, so I want to thank all the members that are present, and all those that have donated over the years, and all those that volunteer for Conservancy. The Conservancy couldn't be if you weren't there to support the work. And I just want to remind people you can renew your membership if you can take an envelope, there's on the table, or you can hand Danny or whoever is sitting in that chair some money. Just make sure they're supposed to be the one taking the money. And for contributions of 100, or more, you can take 5 note cards free. So it's worth it, guys. Just kidding. We're going to break for refreshments in a moment, but first we want to do the drawing for the door prize. And so I need a volunteer to do the. Oh, who came in after?
Oh, that's okay. I'll draw since I didn't put my name in.
Okay. Joyce Kostenmecki. Joyce, you are a winner. So there's 2 months here that we made from Jim's photos. You could pick one of those, or you can pick 5 note cards.
Okay, I'll do it after.
You can do it after, but that's your choice. We do one more.
Hang on, do it again.
Shake them up. Pat Wagner.
Yay!
Good job. You can fight over the mics. I'm not going to be in the middle of it. But the note cards, there's plenty of to go around. All right, and one more thing. We're going to take a break for refreshments. And also, Marcia asked me to let you know about this. This is a list. Marcia Goodrich is going to be speaking for WildOnes about native plants. And if you would like to be on her emailing list, please sign up here. And I think what I'm going to do right now is put this right on this table here. So you can sign up right here if you like, okay? And we'll pass it around when she's doing her presentation. Okay? All right, so let's break for refreshments. They're on the back table.
Also,
Oh, the milkweed. Forgot about the milkweed. Marcia brought, I asked her to bring some native plants, and she is selling for WildOnes, so this is a fundraiser for WildOnes, the group that she represents, milkweed plants. And so if you would like to buy a milkweed plant, Marcia is the one to talk to. She's right here in the lovely pink shirt that says WildOnes. Okay, we're good. She is the president of WildOnes Keweenaw Chapter, and Marcia, that group is very interested in seeing homeowners put native plants in their landscapes, and they want to raise the appreciation of people for the function that native plants provide, the functions that they provide in the landscape. So she has a really fun slideshow, very informative, and I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget, if you want to be on Marcia's email list, you can sign up here if you haven't already. Do you want me to pass that around, Marcia?
sure.
I'll pass it around just in case somebody would like to. Okay, and with that, Marcia.
Well, I'm not quite sure that it's going to be really fun, but hopefully it won't be boring. That's a low bar, but that's what I'm hoping for. Okay, well, as Bonnie said, I have been president of Keweenaw WildOnes now for the last few years, and I've been, what can I say, spending most of my time during those last few years trying to convince everybody that I know that they ought to be gardening with native plants, and you guys are in my sights. So, the next half hour, 45 minutes, just be prepared for that. Well, there's lots of good reasons to grow native plants. But first, I'm going to tell you about the reason that means the most to me. Because by gardening with native plants, you're taking steps to restore the great American ecosystem that once existed all across this continent. About 400 years ago, the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock, along with a few of my ancestors, according to family lore. And in the beginning, my people lived off the land and the generosity of the people who were here first. Eventually, though, they brought plants and animals from Eurasia, and all those plants and animals began spreading across the continent. The European colonists, my people, cut down the forests, drained the swamps, dammed the rivers, and even managed to turn the Midwest's fabulous tall grass prairie into a sterile monoculture. Like this. Yes, corn is great stuff. It feeds cows, it feeds people. It's probably prevented us from famine, but it's still a sterile monoculture. Compared to America's woods, prairies, and wetlands, which were teeming with life a few short centuries ago, very few species can thrive here. For a while, it wasn't so bad, because back in the day, farms had woodlots and they had hedgerows, and a lot of creatures could make a living in there. But when Big Ag pretty much took over agriculture, all those little hideaways disappeared, and farmers started wringing every last nickel out of every acre. And there's not much room for native plants or birds or bugs in a landscape like that. Sure, we do grow lots of food, but your average native plant doesn't stand a chance against all that Roundup. Plus, as we've been turning half of America into crops and rangeland, we've been converting a lot of wild space into development, the places we live. About 69 million acres is in urban or suburban landscapes, and that's a pretty conservative estimate because it's about 10 years old. That amount is growing all the time. There's not much room for native plants here either. Ironically, that's about the same amount of space that the USDA characterizes as miscellaneous, the marshes, swamps, deserts, and tundra. those undeveloped places where wildlife can flourish and humans take a backseat. In all that development, we did leave some room where we could have less invasive plants, but we didn't. We kicked them out and we planted our favorites. And I can understand that. It's hard to turn your back on tulips and daffodils. But any drive around suburbia shows that we really, really love our lawns. The ecologist and entomologist Doug Talby of the University of Delaware estimates that there's only about 5% of our land in the lower 48 that's still in its pre-settlement state, with the original ecosystem intact. That's not a lot. Yes, there are certainly places where wildlife are doing okay. We know about that. We kind of live in a place like that. But even so-called wildlands are affected by logging, cattle grazing, and other human activities. 400 years ago, the continent was full of native plants. Now, not so much. As you've probably guessed, that we have met the enemy, and he is us, as those of us who are old enough to remember Pogo. No. We kicked out the plants, and when we did, we kicked out the wildlife. And that really bothers me, and that's what drives my passion for native plants. Because even though we've uplanded ecosystems all over America, we really do have a chance to do something about it now. We can't do something about everything. And I don't know about you, but in the back of my head, I thought that when I switched all the light bulbs in our house to LEDs, it might help the polar bears. Not so much. I mean, it wasn't that it was a bad thing, but what one person can do in many circumstances isn't a lot. But if you can make a difference with native plants, you can grow them, and you can give some of these wild creatures their homes back. Of course, there is a little bit more to it. What makes native plants so special? Can't just wildlife adapt to crops and lawn and bishop's weed and lily in the valley? The short answer is no, it can't. All over the world, native plant species evolved on their particular spot of ground with its particular soil, water, and temperature. They co-evolved with the wildlife that shared the same site, and together they wove a complex tapestry of life. Native plants are its foundation. Everything else is built on that. And they are the foundation of that biodiverse ecosystem. You can't just swap out plants from one continent to another and expect wildlife to automatically adjust. That would sort of be like expecting humans to live on bamboo instead of lasagna. Things would start to come apart. And that is exactly what's been happening. You can see the results in academic journals. Insect populations all over the world are collapsing, and with them the birds that depend on those insects for food. There's more than one reason for the decline, obviously. Two bad boys, as we've mentioned, are climate change and pesticides, especially insecticides. But another big one is habitat loss. That big chunk of the U.S. that's not wild anymore, where the original inhabitants can't make a go of it. Multiple studies have told us the same thing. My dad used to take us on Sunday drives through the country, and sometimes we'd have to stop in the middle of the drive and clean our windshields. That just doesn't happen anymore. So why should we care? More specifically, why should a hedge fund manager care, or an oil company executive care about bugs and nature, as opposed to perhaps stock options and profits? Because, as Dave Wilson wrote, it's not just about the bugs. The decline of insects threatens human well-being, for we need insects to pollinate our crops, recycle dung, leaves, and corpses, keep the soil healthy, control pests, and much more. Many larger animals, such as birds, fish, and frogs, rely on insects for food. As insects become scarce, our world will slowly grind to a halt. And as Rachel Carson said, man is a part of nature, And his war against nature is inevitably a war against himself. And what we're doing right now isn't enough to stop it. As Doug Talmy writes, unless we modify the places we live, work, and play to meet not only our own needs, but the needs of other species as well, nearly all species of wildlife native to the United States will disappear forever. This isn't speculation. Our preserves and natural parks are not adequate to prevent the predicted loss of species. And we have run out of space required to make them big enough for conservationists and indeed for anyone who celebrates life on Earth. This is perhaps the direst possible consequence of the human enterprise. The good news is nature is resilient. Okay. We can't bring back the passenger pigeon, we can't bring back the Xerxes blue butterfly or the Carolina parakeet, but we can sure try to save the monarch and the rusty patched bumblebee. In the meantime, we will reap environmental benefits and restore our relationship with the natural world. And we can do all of that by bringing some of that original great American ecosystem back into our lives. And we can do that by putting those native plants in our own yards. Actually, putting in native plants to save the world is pretty much the easy part. I bet most people in this room like plants. And if you are a gardener, and I suspect many of you are, there's not too many things that are more fun than exploring a new palette of plants. It's the rest of the ecosystem that you might have second thoughts about. Almost everyone says they enjoy nature, but most people do not invite bugs into their lives. In fact, many of us do everything we can to pretty much keep them out. We even preferentially buy pest-free plants, and we consider an insect-free yard to be a healthy yard. This is really not true. And here's why. And this is something you might have remembered from junior high or high school science. And it reminded me of it when I read it anyway. Through photosynthesis, plants capture the sun's energy, and more than any other type of organism, bugs, or more precisely insects, transfer that energy to themselves and then by being eaten to other species, all the way up the pyramid of life. That's an essential link in a healthy ecosystem, and it just doesn't happen without insects. Oddly enough, most insects are kind of fussy about what they eat. So it's important to have a diversity of plants in your yard to have a vibrant insect population. And yes, you do want a vibrant insect population, not just for brand reasons, but also for something a little bit closer to home, because guess what relies on insects? Birds. Yes, 96 of birds in North America rely on insects to feed their young. Studies show that in areas where alien plants have taken over, birds decline. Sure, sunflower seed feeders are fine for adult birds, though not so much right now with bird flu, but when I wrote this, it was still okay for bird feeders. But almost no birds feed seeds to their babies. For that, they need insects, or more specifically, they need caterpillars. In landscapes dominated by alien plants, there's not much food for caterpillars, and that's too bad, because without caterpillars, especially moth caterpillars, you don't have baby birds. The naturalist Jim McCormick calls them nature's hot dogs. They're soft, squishy packages of protein and fat that are really easy to stuff down the throats of baby birds. Researchers found that Carolina chickadee parents gather up to 9,000 caterpillars to raise a clutch of chicks. And yards without native plants have fewer chickadees and raise smaller families, not even enough to maintain the population. But wait, there's even more reasons to like bugs. You can actually harness the power of insects to remove pests from your garden. Lots of flies, wasps, beetles, and other creatures survive by eating garden pests like slugs and cabbage worms. You can nurture these good bugs by avoiding pesticides and reducing soil disturbance. And you can attract useful wasps, which happen to be my favorite, by growing native plants. The adult wasps need two things. They need flowers, because they feed on their nectar, and they need caterpillars, because they use caterpillars to feed their young. So the best place in the world for these native wasps who are just dying to help you is a vegetable garden that attracts pests surrounded by native plants. It may take a season or two for them to figure it all out, so be patient. By the way, native wasps aren't anything like the yellow jackets that sting people. I have had my yard alive with all kinds of bees and wasps and have never been stung by them. But I've been stung plenty of times by the non-native yellow jackets, so we are not talking about these guys. Native wasps are gentle. Okay, and I don't mean to beat anyone over the head about this, but, so I've only got this one slide. But you can't really talk about native plants without talking about their opposite, the lawn. We didn't used to have lawns. You know, we used to grow potatoes and pretty flowers and stuff, but in this century, we really started to go into town with our lawns. And I think one of the reasons we have is because of what the author Nancy Lawson calls the landscaping industrial complex that makes a lot of money on all the things we want to do to have a perfect lawn. And so what's happened is an ideal lawn has become an important status symbol. It's an emblem of good citizenship. And as part of that, lawns have become America's fourth largest crop at 40 million acres. That's behind corn, soybeans, and wheat. And it's a crop that not only doesn't feed humans, it is a food desert for wildlife. There's no nectar, no pollen, no seeds for birds. And there are costs to this obsession. I love a pretty lawn too, but turf grass soaks up a lot of water. About a third of all residential water use in the United States goes for irrigation, and a big chunk of that goes for lawns. And in some places, usually the places that have the least amount of water, the least afford, it's up to 50%. Plus, Americans buy 70 million pounds of chemical fertilizer each year to keep lawns lush, according to the EPA. And we use up to, let's see, can I read that? Not very well. We use up to 10 times the amount of pesticides per acre as agriculture does. And then, of course, there's mower pollution, and I confess we have a mower. If you use a mower for 1 hour, it releases 10 times the emissions as a modern car does driving. And the annual cost for lawn care runs in the United States to about $40 billion. And meanwhile, to add insult to injury, all the stuff that we put on the lawn doesn't really sink in there. So when a landscaping friend of mine calls lawns green pavement. So when it rains, all the stuff that we put on it goes down into the storm sewers and into our lakes and rivers and streams. On the other hand, here's what native plants bring to the park. This sketch shows the root system of native prairie plants compared to turf grass on the right. Much of the growth is below ground. When a native plant starts from seed, it puts most of its energy into growing that incredible root system. And that's why it can take a while for native plants to really get going in your garden. The first year, we say they sleep, the second year they creep, and then the third year they leap. With some plants, it's faster than that, and with others, it's slower. Some native species roots can reach down to 15 feet, such as this prairie dock right there. Compare that to the 2 inches for turf grass. Because native plants have such an extensive root system, they're less affected by drought or fire. That's a big reason why native plants are so much more sustainable in comparison to non-native plants. And they require almost no watering. And when you think about it, lawns were bred to satisfy human fashion. Well, native plants evolved to take care of themselves. They're perfectly happy if you're not there. Okay, well, we have talked about the benefits of native plants to the ecosystem. Now let's take a look at what they do for us in the near term. Once established, they don't require much intervention. Like I said, they're the anti-lawn. They're no watering, no fertilizer. Please don't fertilize your native plants, okay? People are always asking me, I say, well, I'm going to put some fertilizer on it. Don't do that, because it will encourage overgrowth and weeds. They require less maintenance. They have deep roots, like we talked about, that suck water into the ground, reducing pollution and runoff and controlling flooding. You can grow a rain garden that will specifically address problems with stormwater runoff in your yard. It's a little bit of a different topic than we're dealing with tonight, but it's still a really great technique. The native roots sequester carbon many feet into the ground, and they reduce erosion. And most importantly, they're really beautiful. We are talking about gardens after all. No one here wants an ugly garden. You're looking here at Prairie Blazing Star, Wild Bergamot, and Black-Eyed Susans. And let's take a tour for a moment and talk about what a native plant actually is. Generally, we think of native plants as being native to North America if they were here before European settlement. But humans being human, you can imagine that there's not a perfect consensus on any of this. Is a plant from Arkansas, native to Ann Arbor, so long as the bugs like it and the birds eat the seeds? It's a matter of debate, actually, and ultimately it's your garden and you get to choose. A great way to find out if plants are native to your area is to consult the BONAP maps. They're the Biota of North America program maps, and they have the range of just about any plant that you would care to grow. The two biggest Midwestern native plant nurseries, which are Prairie Nursery and Prairie Moon, include them online in their on their websites. So if you are looking at a plant and you want to make sure something is native to here, you can click the range tab and see. Doesn't mean that others won't grow here, but if that's important to you, you can find out. Another good reference for choosing plants native to your area is pollinator.org. It's the website of the Pollinator Partnership, and they provide really neat planting guides for the region. And what I think is especially nice about this is that a lot of people think in terms of, well, is this native to the UP? Is this native to Michigan? Is this a Midwest flower? They actually take bioregions. And ours is in sort of the Great Lakes, and they cover the plants that actually grow in conditions that are very much like ours, which can be quite a bit different from, say, Detroit. Another great reference is the Michigan State Extension Service. It has 3 really good native plant lists for the state. There's one for the UP, one for Southern Michigan, and one for Northern Michigan. Plus, it has lots of other great information. And if you really want to get into it, MichiganFlora.net is a huge database of every plant in Michigan. It's not the best place to find out if something will grow in your yard, but if you are looking for to find out if a plant is native, or if it grows in Houghton County or in the UP, this is a wonderful site. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's got lots of good information. Okay, so we can move on. You might have some reservations about growing native plants. There are some cool rumors out there. Some people think native yards are weak. Well, it's very possible to grow a very tidy, lovely garden just with native plants. Sure, there are those of us who want to grow every plant in the catalog, and you can end up with an overly exuberant yard that way. But the good thing about that is you learn a lot about all kinds of different plants. But even then, people who know about native plants will recognize that your yard is a really neat place and appreciate it. Native plants are aggressive. Some native plants are aggressive. Those milkweeds out there, don't put them in a lovely little spot with, you know, petunias and coneflowers, because they will take over and the other ones will be toast. But they're great by in an alley or in the back border or in the back of your house. And if you think about it, there's plenty of non-native aggressive plants too. It's just a question of putting them in the right spot. Native plants attract mosquitoes. No, they don't. Standing water attracts mosquitoes. Native plants, however, attract the predators on mosquitoes. They attract birds. You find dragonflies poking around in your native plants. There's all kinds of good things that come from native plants that can help control mosquitoes. There are good ways to control mosquitoes above and beyond that, but please don't use insecticides, because you'll kill some of the very critters that are trying to kill your mosquitoes for you. Native plants cause allergies. This is a myth that arose because people started getting bad allergies when they saw goldenrod blooming. And they blamed the goldenrod. And they didn't notice the ragweed that was blooming at the same time, because the ragweed is just so little and it's not very noticeable. But ragweed is a terrible allergy causer. So unless you have a specific allergy, no, native plants don't cause allergies. Native plants violate weed ordinances. Well, depends on the weed ordinance. But frankly, a lot of communities are starting to move away from weed ordinances that are so broad that any old native garden is going to be out of the question. Most are starting to allow that, and even Hancock now is considering an update of its ordinances that will allow more native plants. It's pretty exciting. So maybe after all of this, you'd like to try native gardening if you haven't already. Well, there's certainly more than one way to go native. One thing is for sure, transitioning from non-native plants to native landscaping frees you to consider plants not just for how they look, but also what they really bring to the party, how you can start creating a living landscape that includes insects, birds, and other wildlife. That's why many new native gardeners start by installing pre-designed gardens. It's simple, they're really nice, professional people have done with them, and I've gotten one of these before too. Remember, Bill? Yes. On the left is a pollinator garden that was put together by Prairie Moon from Minnesota, and on the right and on the left is a pollinator garden by Prairie Nursery from Wisconsin. As you proceed, it's not a bad idea to consider the neighborhood. Most of us do want to be good neighbors, and it's very possible to create native landscaping that's really pretty while blending in with your neighbor's conventional designs. Most simply, you can just start adding a few native plants to your regular flower beds. You don't need to rip out all your landscaping and start from scratch. You can plant what I call a pocket prairie. You know, just a small little island garden, and just begin with filling that up with some beautiful native plants. And there's lots of designs for those online. You can design in a very formal manner. There are some native plants that you are often seen in conventional gardens. And I'm working on something like that in my own yard now, after previously doing a every pretty thing garden in my other house. You can widen your existing borders, take out a little bit of that lawn, and just start adding a few more flowers that way. But if you really want to make a difference, over time you might want to shoot for having about 70% native plants, because that's the percentage that the sort of the tipping point when birds and other creatures can really start to benefit from the native plants in your garden. And you can even think of planting for specific species, like this milkweed, this red milkweed for monarchs. And here's Culver's root, that's a favorite of bumblebees. And here we get to the pictures. This is a typical urban yard. And this is what happened to it a few years later. They removed the lawn, planted native plants in attractive groupings. You know, this is not anything goes yard here by any means. And then they put in paths so visitors could wander through and enjoy the landscape. And this is the first year of a rain garden along a street with a public view. The natives haven't filled in yet, because during the first year, like I said, they put all their energy into growing those roots. So in the beginning, the owner put in annuals to kind of fill in the spaces. Also, you'll note that there's prairie dropseed, those here, plants growing along the edge, and that gives that's a nice border, and it lets people know that this is a tended space. And this is the same garden 2 years later. No annuals needed. But this is my old front yard. This is when before it got, don't go there today. I haven't lived there for 3 years, and you can tell. But suffice it to say, I wasn't following any advice to blend in with the neighbors, but bless their hearts, they never complained, and some people actually complimented me. And here's the homeowner has planted native little bluestem and prairie dropseed grasses along with some purple coneflower. You can't really see here because it's not blooming. And a serviceberry near the front door. And it's a nice kind of formal planting. They've only used a few species, which is a technique that many garden designers use to avoid a look that's a little bit busy or chaotic, which is what I'm always seduced by. And here are some early summer blooms at the Marcia Center near Houghton. Jill Fisher, who is part of the Keweenaw Land Trust, some of you may know her, is installing native gardens there. And this shows how nicely her garden is starting to turn out. What you're seeing here is wild lupin and wild columbine with a little black-eyed Susan popping up here and there. There really are not very many native gardens in our area, unfortunately. But Chris Van Dommelen in Hancock, who probably has the most eye-catching garden in the Keweenaw, incorporates lots of native plants into her amazing yard. And here you can see pale purple coneflower in front with the orange butterfly weed. And there's some landsleaf coreopsis in there. That's the yellow. Also in Chris's yard is this planting of Pearly Everlasting that's backed up by purple coneflower. Pearly Everlasting is a great plant. It has a nice tendency to fill in, but it doesn't really duke it out like other plants. It just kind of becomes a living mulch around things. And I've got some growing in my yard right now, and there's a little purple spot to the left, and that's purple prairie clover. It's just getting ready to bloom. This inviting woodland setting shows how you can use natives in a tidy manner. The wildflowers are grouped together to provide a nice visual impact, while the natural light path inviting visitors into the garden. And here's an example of a public planting in progress a few years ago, this bioswale in the middle of the Hancock Beach parking lot was overrun with invasive exotics. Mainly spotted knapweeds, but all kinds of other stuff too. And since then, WildOnes and the Hancock Beautification Group have been pulling weeds and adding lots of native plants. And it's finally starting to be presentable. On the left is butterfly weed, and the photo on the right shows some of the midsummer blooms that are coming out now amidst the little blue stem and switchgrass. Businesses are putting in natural landscapes too because, well, certainly they can save a lot of money on chemicals and fertilizer, but not with that lawn. But I also think that a lot of businesses want to be good corporate stewards and set a good example for the community. The native plants provide visual interest all year long, beginning in early spring, right up to winter. In the fall, the seed heads ripen and provide food for migrating birds. And on the left, here, we have a little blue stem, which is a great grass. And on the right is a serviceberry, which not only feeds the birds, it's wonderful to look at in the fall. I really love how native landscapes look in the winter, especially after the first fall snow. This is Sweet Joe Pieweed from my yard in Hancock. Most people who garden with natives let their gardens stay up all winter long, and later on in the spring they'll usually cut them down. One of the first things you'll notice when you plant native plants is that wildlife starts to return to your yard. Over time, you might be amazed at the number of insects and birds that are attracted to your plants because they've evolved to rely on them for food and shelter, and you have invited them back home. Every little step you take toward creating a healthy native habitat will make your yard more inviting to the other creatures that we share the planet with. These monarchs are nectaring on meadow blazing star, which is one of their favorites. It's not native to here, but you can grow it here, and I'm not against that. You need more than milkweed to save the monarchs. They need nectar to fuel themselves for that long trip to Mexico. Here's some other pollinators that might come to your native garden. There's a native bee on purple prairie clover on the left, and a black swallowtail in the native phlox. And this is from my new front yard in Houghton. I planted a bunch of pachyra, also known as golden groundsel, in my battle against invasive periwinkle. I was really pleased to see this little Arctic skipper visiting it this spring. There will come a time when you will welcome all these critters in your yard, and not just the pretty ones. When you see a bug eating your native plant, that is a cause for celebration. That means your plants are doing what they're supposed to be doing, supporting the whole ecosystem. Keep your eyes peeled for some interesting customers. This little charmer on the left is a saddleback caterpillar. To the right are milkweed bugs, another insect that relies on milkweed. Birds will come for the insects, and they love the seeds too. And I'm going to see if I can make this work. There. Okay. This is a video from our former backyard where a bunch of siskins flew through and found our Sweet Joe Pieweed. That is one flower right there. There's another one. And you can just, unfortunately, they are not bright yellow or anything. So you just kind of have to see the motion to realize how much use those birds got off those flowers. And it meant so much more to us to see them on our flowers instead of just coming to a feeder. Natural landscaping and its wildlife provide a great opportunity to get kids involved in nature. If you can, leave some wild space where it's okay to trample, where kids can play and explore. Okay, so now that you're ready to maybe replace part of your lawn, what would come next? People who are new to native gardening always ask me how they can learn more about natives. And I always tell them to do what they would do if they wanted to learn about any other kind of plants. And I would say, and you know, get yourself a good catalog. We used to get the Burpee and the Gertie catalogs in the mail, and now you can get the Prairie Moon and the Prairie Nursery catalogs. You don't have to buy anything, but they are a great introduction to hundreds of different plants. Yeah, it's great to buy from them because they're wonderful people and they provide a great service, but you don't have to. More and more nurseries and garden centers are offering native plants now. Try to find nurseries that specialize in natives and have an obvious interest in them. Locally, we're lucky to have 3 really good suppliers, and by locally I mean within a day's drive. Okay. Dennis Greenhouse in Lake Linden has a really nice selection of native plants, and Mary in Lennington is crazy about them. So if you, that is a wonderful spot to just go and browse. See, they just might have the specific plant they're looking for too. Designs by Nature in Marquette is awesome. She does not have a nursery that you can just walk up to, but you can order online and then they'll pick it up at their nursery. She'll assemble the order for you. What makes her really special is that she gathers wild seed for many of her plants and starts them locally. You probably aren't going to find that anywhere else. Well, except sometimes at the WildOnes sales, but not always. Okay. There is a native, if you're not from the area, there is a native plant nursery database by state at growitbuildit.com. And there are other online nurseries that also have the plants. And of course, WildOnes has plant sales. We have a couple a year. You know, we just finished one and we're going to have another one in September. One of the things that we caution people about when they start wanting to get native plants is to put the brakes on any wildflowers in can mixes. Those often have invasive exotic species from Eurasia. You know, you find all those little oxeye daisies, all those little Flanders field poppies that they're gorgeous, but they aren't native, and they will quickly take over from any native plants they have in the mix. That's really not a good place to get native seed. But Prairie Moon and Prairie Nursery have excellent seed mixes. That's where I would recommend getting seeds. Of course, don't dig from the wild, and think twice about getting cultivars. Cultivars are native plants that are selected from particular traits that people like. And in fact, in standard nurseries, you'll see lots of cultivars of native plants. But the problem with cultivars is that they are selecting for traits that we like. They aren't selecting for traits that the bees like, or that the beetles like, or that the birds like. So in selecting for these things that we like, they can very well be reducing their usefulness to other creatures. And if the first thing people want to learn about native plants is, what are they? How do I find out about them? The second thing they want to know is how to design a garden. Our National WildOnes Office has commissioned several landscape scale designs that include detailed plans for mini gardens. And on the right is the overview of one in Milwaukee. Now that's pretty daunting, but if you go to the site, you can drill down and find what they've done in any one of those spots. So they're really useful. And also on our website, keweenaw.wildones.org, I've put in a list of all different kinds of places where you can find garden designs. And then of course you might want to learn more. There's lots of great books. For starters, I'd recommend Doug Talby's Nature's Best Hope to find out the reasoning behind growing native plants, and Owen Wurmser's Lawns into Meadows. It's a great how-to book on installing a native plant garden. So, now you know what to do to heal the earth. Just increase the number of native plants in your yard. It's sustainable, doesn't require a lot of water or herbicides or pesticides. You know, you are helping to restore an ecosystem. They're beautiful, and what's most important to me is you're really giving wildlife its home back. learn more by doing reading, exploring on the web, and you can also join WildOnes. You don't have to, but it's my pitch. If you'd like to learn more and become part of the native plant movement, please consider joining. We have a local chapter, but there are chapters all over the place. We're a national organization devoted to encouraging people to grow with native plants, and really the chapters are its heart and soul. Some organizations are kind of top down, ours is bottom up. We do plant sales, programs, we do wildflower walks, garden tours, public garden projects, and lots more. Our motto is healing the earth 1 yard at a time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bonnie, for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Marcia. I always learn a lot when I listen to you. So it's almost 8:30. We probably have, if there maybe 2 questions, if somebody has a question that's arisen
Or
for Marcia.
if you want to talk to me afterward, you can.
If not yet, they can call you afterwards.
No.
So thank you very much. And thank you all for coming tonight.